I want to thank y'all for letting me come and speak to y'all tonight. My name is Michael Gallaway. I am a candidate for State Senate District 4. Some of you, well, y'all know my history to a large extent. I'm 49 years old. I'm married, been married to my wife Angela, a lovely bride, for 28 years. I have 2 children, Lane, who is 17, and Lauren, who is 20. Lauren is currently a junior at the University of Texas, and she's doing a study abroad program in Ireland, interning with the Irish Parliament. And I think some of y'all had met her a couple years ago. This seat that I'm running for, District 4, is a seat that I previously held back in the late 90s. I was first elected to this office in 1994 when I defeated arguably the most powerful Democrat legislator in the state of Texas, a fellow by the name of Carl Parker, in a district that was considered 60% Democrat. And I was the first Republican elected to this district since 1876. And I was also, at the age of 29, the youngest senator in the state of Texas. And while I was in office, I had a strong record for being a conservative. I mean, there was no doubt about that in people's mind where I stood on the issues. But some of my accomplishments while I was in office was things like, one of the first things I tackled was Lamar University down in Jefferson County. It was a university system that was virtually bankrupt. In my opinion, it was corrupt. And I abolished that university system, where I think I'm the only legislator in the state that's ever done something like that. I abolished that university system and rolled it into the Texas state system. And it is now a thriving university under that management. I took on the EPA and the TNRCC to end, or actually to stop, something that was fixing to be implemented in this region, and that was the auto emissions testing program. It was, in my opinion, it was also corrupt. And it was my line of questioning that brought the special committee that I was appointed to stand up to the federal government and tell them no. Something that is badly needed right this day and time, with the intrusions that the federal government is doing on the states against sovereign rights of the state, and ramming things down our throat, and are not acting in the capacity that they should on things like immigration. And it's important that we have leaders in Austin that will actually push that ball forward. There was an expansion in 1997. There was a effort to expand the tax base and revamp the tax system, and it would have opened up a whole new line of taxes, spreading it out across a lot of things, and expanded the business tax. And they were actually trying to expand the business tax and franchise, what we generally call the franchise tax, or margin tax. It's been modified off and on. All the way down there was an attempt to do it all the way down to the sole proprietor, which would have amounted to nothing more than a state income tax. And I was the holdout vote. I stood up against my own party to defeat that. They drugged me in the back room and slammed their hands on the table and cursed at me and told me that the presidency of the United States was on the line, because at that time George W. Bush was the governor, and his plan was to reform the tax system in Texas and use that as a springboard on the national level. I did it in Texas, I can do it nationally. The only problem was the plan they had was bad for Texas. And I killed that because I was the holdout vote on it. They came back to me and they said, okay, what are you willing to do? We were in conference already at that time. We'd opened it up to go beyond the realm of the legislation that had come out. And my response to that was, because there was very little we could do as far as restructuring. My plan was, I was working with Talmadge Heflin at the time, who was a House member, to end property tax in the state of Texas and go to a pure consumption-based tax. Of course, I couldn't file it in the Senate because all tax bills have to originate in the House. But I was working the Senate side of it, and Talmadge never could get it out of the House because the leadership was focusing on this plan that they had put together. But what I did is I told him, I said, look, we had $1 billion surplus. It was the largest surplus we'd ever had. I said, at this point, all I'm willing to do is take the $1 billion and return it to the taxpayers in property tax relief, is what we did. The Governor Bush flew to Beaumont, Texas, and met me at the airport there, signed the legislation, and gave me the pen. There was a reason why he did that, because I'm the one that made that happen. And of course, I was a little young and naive at the time, and I failed to realize that our appraisal districts simply gobbled it back up the following year through increased appraisals, which is a large part of my platform, something that one of the reasons that I'm running for this office again for. It's because we've heard time, and there's several issues, but you know, we keep getting the same patronizing rhetoric from our elected officials. And I know all of y'all are tired of it. You know what I'm talking about. Where they keep telling you they're doing these things and nothing really changes. Nothing. With the same issues that we're looking at right now, we were looking at 20 years ago. We've gained Republican majorities in both houses. We've got Republican across the board on the statewide level. Yet we still have not accomplished the things that are important to us as conservatives. And I want to go up there and change that. I'm not afraid of being called a bad name like many of the establishment Republicans are, and they cower down to the pressures of the press or whoever it may be. You know, oh, we can't do that, we can't say that, we can't try that. I don't believe in that. I never have. You know, it's one of the reasons why Ted Cruz is so popular right now, is because he's willing to stand up and take those slings and arrows. I was a Ted Cruz 20 years ago in the Texas legislature, and I'm wanting to return to the Texas legislature and do that same thing. Are you saying that I'm out of time?
Oh, you've been out of time.
I've been out of time? Oh. Well, I'm glad I had your attention.
Okay, so what we'll do is go around the room and everybody ask a question for as long as we can for 45 minutes. Again, you have 2 minutes to answer. If you don't use the whole time, somebody might use that as a follow-up to answer something else.
And I apologize if I go over, you know, I did serve in the Senate, so, you know, they do have the filibuster.
All right. So let me start with the elephant in the room. Why'd you wait until the last day to file, avoiding most, if not all, of the debate forums to date?
There's a lot of debates and forums to take place yet, and one of the reasons why I did not file right away. First of all, I was not in the position business-wise to do so. Nobody expected Tommy Williams to resign 10 months into that term, and I had a lot of things lined out personally and business-wise that were in the works that I had to clear off my calendar. I had to get them out of the way before I could commit to something like this. That's one thing. I did make it very clear that I was seriously looking at this race, and I have been since October the 28th or whatever it was. Another reason is we did not know when the race was going. When the other parties jumped in this, there wasn't even a race yet. Initially, Williams hadn't resigned, so there was no open seat. Once there was an open seat, we had to wait for the governor to sign a proclamation calling for a special election. That special election could have been held within 30 days. Or it could have waited all the way to the next uniform election date, which is where it is now. And that's what happened. It was weeks before he did that. The next thing is that, you know, I work real hard in campaigns at retail politics. I believe in getting out there among the people. I think it's the most powerful thing, and it's the most cost-effective thing that you can do. And I'm pretty good at getting earned media as well to let people know what I'm doing and what's going on. And if you notice, my timing on getting into this race garnered me a bit of earned media. A lot of people found out real quick I was in this race. No one was even paying attention to this race until after the primary. because it's not a primary race. And it was a distraction from it. The other reason that I waited to the very end, and this is a very important one, is that I did not want the Democrats, and I'm very surprised about it. Brian and I had this discussion. With the Democrats having the whole battleground Texas going on, I was concerned that they may throw somebody from Beaumont or Port Arthur as a Democrat into this race and get out the Democrat machine. That still, Jefferson County's made a lot of headway since I got elected in '94 in building elected Republicans in that county. But there's still a strong Democrat base there, and there's still a strong Democrat machine there. And the fact that this is a special election and the voter turnout may be very low, and we already had a three-way race among those that consider themselves Republican and or, on whose definition conservative.
Well, don't you, getting in the race, doesn't that increase the likelihood, or didn't it, of potentially a Democrat winning?
Well, that's my point. But I knew a Democrat wasn't in the race at that time. And that's why I felt more comfortable getting into the race. I did not want to sacrifice that. I mean, you have to understand my motivation in politics. I'm not interested in being somebody. I'm not interested in being famous or powerful or any of that. There's something to be said for being anonymous. Believe you me. For the last 22 years, I've done this because it's what I believe in. I want to get things done. I want to move our issues forward and make progress on them.
So then, why did you jump in this race with another conservative in the race and splitting that vote off with maybe some establishment voters?
Well, obviously, I got in this race because I believe I'm the best person for the job. I believe I add something that the others don't, or more of, and that's grit and determination. Nobody can deny my determination, my perseverance, my resolve on conservative issues, and there's plenty of people that won't deny my grit either. When I was in the Senate, I told you before, I was the youngest member of the Senate. I was 29. The lieutenant governor at the time was Bob Bullock, and he nicknamed me Pup because the average age was 56 in the Senate. But it didn't take long for my colleagues in the Senate to change that to Pitbull or Bulldog, because I was relentless. And I accomplished, my record speaks for itself on things that I accomplished. It's like the annexation issue. I pushed that so hard when Houston surprisingly, during the interim, annexed Kingwood. And I fought for the people of Kingwood. And I passed a bill, the only bill in history through the Senate that would stop forced annexation. Not only once, but I passed it twice in the same session with Democrat majorities. I had a majority of, even though we had a Democrat majority in the House, I was able to garner a majority of the members to co-sign the legislation. It was blocked by the chairman of the counters, who was Mark Stiles, who had a close personal relationship with Bob Lanier. It's the only thing that stopped that. But because of my fight on that issue, I was able to convince the lieutenant governor to appoint a special interim committee. And out of that interim committee came the greatest reforms to annexation since 1963. 1963. We're talking 35 years. And under those reforms, Kingwood couldn't have happened. The Woodlands, couldn't have happened. When the former senators kind of, in my opinion, sold the Woodlands out on the deal that they did, now they'd be paying homage to the city of Houston for no telling how long. When what they should have done is continue to fight and do what was right and preserve the consent of the governed in this state, which has still not been accomplished since I left office. That issue has not been pushed along anymore, even though we have Republican majorities now. And it's shameful. So I have the resolve, and I have the grit, I have the determination that I think we need in Austin right now to make sure that these issues that we have been fighting for so long get accomplished. I'm not afraid to take the slings and arrows. I'm not afraid of failure. You know, I believe that failure is a tuition to the school of hard knocks. And, you know, I got a PhD in that.
Okay, Ken?
You mentioned that you support you don't support benefits to homosexual partners.
No.
Do you believe the state should be involved in marriage to begin with?
You know, look, marriage is really a commitment between, in my mind, between a man and a woman and God, period. Marriage, I mean, that's what, it's holy matrimony, you know, that's what it is. It is simply what we have through the state as a license, but that kind of has codified that, actually. And throughout our history, that's what it's been, between a man and a woman. One man, one woman. And I believe it should stay that way. Now, you know, the issue on same-sex benefits, I think that was the question, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. About same-sex benefits. You keep in mind, you know, it's a money issue. The issue that they're pushing is a money issue. It's a way to game the system. Clear and simple. You know, that they use the term gay rights or homosexual rights or whatever, the rights. There's no such thing. They have the same rights that all of us have. We all have the same rights. There's no specific right. You know, what are they talking about? A right. They all have the same right that we have. Everyone has the same right. But what they're trying to do is to be able to get benefits. That's the reason why they want, you know, gay marriage or the civil union. But they'll use the argument, oh, well, you can't, you know, go see a loved one in the hospital. You can't, you know, if they die, you don't have a right to their estate or any of these things. But that's baloney anyway, because there's contracts you can do for all those things. That's what they make wills for. That's what they make living wills for. That's what they make powers of attorneys for. They can do all of those things and accomplish all of the things that they claim they want, but that ain't what they want. They want to take money out of your pocket and give benefits to their domestic partner or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that's the issue that they're trying to do. They just paint it in a different way, that we're all a bunch of mean, homophobic individuals, but it's a money thing to them.
So
to me, it's a very principled thing.
So in question 21, you talked about taxes, and you basically said you were for all the use tax and the sin tax, utility tax, and hotel tax, but the franchise tax and you called it indirect tax, and you put in parentheses property tax.
Because it is an indirect tax, particularly school property tax. Or
So-
we will talk
so
about a
my
state
My
tax.
question is, why do you think it's an indirect tax, for one?
Okay.
And then two, you know, most of the property tax is not a state tax. It is a district tax, so
Local,
school
right,
tax
okay.
or
Okay, let me-
an improvement district or that kind of thing. So why do you oppose that, since that is local controlled tax
Okay.
typically? And then why do you like the sin taxes and the utility tax?
Well, I prefer consumption taxes. I believe that any tax, I mean, and we have to have a form of taxation. We have to have a way to run our government. I mean, nobody's going to deny that. We have to have a way to you know, police, fire, build roads, whatever it may be. And so I'm not against taxes. I don't like them any more than anybody else does. But any tax on capital or income is inherently evil, period. It's harmful to the economy. And, you know, like I was talking before, I was working with Talmadge Heflin to do that. And it was remarkable when I really laid it out and explained it to people. If we did not have, we don't have a state income tax, but the margins tax is an income tax, business tax. And but if we had no property tax or no tax based on revenue from a company. We'd be the only state in the union that had no tax on capital or income. We'd be a haven for capital intensive businesses, without question. But the property tax.
So on the issue of indirect. And
Okay, the indirect, let me say this, because it is an indirect tax. You know, we've been in lawsuits for 30 years over the school funding. And the state constitution, what it requires is that the state provide an adequate education. Well, about historically, roughly half of that money comes from property taxes. And the state funds the other portion. And they do that based upon what's being collected in property taxes. You know, and then at different times they've done the Robin Hood plan and all that stuff. It is indirectly a state tax. It's the state's responsibility under our Constitution to provide an adequate education. But that has never really been defined. It's the reason why we've been in all the lawsuits that we have. But, you know, I want to do away with property tax as a form of funding education. I would like to see it funded from the state level, not controlled from the state level. Ultimately, I'd like to see this to go to a voucher program of some type. I think there's an area, a school district in this district that is a prime school district for that. And for a pilot project to show that it can work, because I believe it will.
Done?
Okay, well, let's continue talking about that. You know, the property tax is one of my biggest issues, and I could list hundreds of things, you probably could too.
Mm-hmm.
And we've interviewed a few dozen candidates, and we asked them the same thing, and they all, you know, don't like it and want to do something
Mm-hmm.
else. And in my mind, next year, we could generate 10% of the funds from increased sales taxes, and the next year we could do 20%, 30%. We can do something.
Through attrition. We could do it through, keep this in mind. We could have eliminated half our property tax in the last 10, 15 years if we'd have actually held the line on state spending at the true growth of inflation and population. And we haven't done that. And we could have grown a lot of that away already. But we haven't done that.
And that's the issue. The same thing is true for Social Security. We could have fixed it 30 years ago, and nobody's done it.
Right.
And our property taxes really haven't changed in my adult life. You know, Dewhurst says he's cut taxes 56 times, and I haven't really seen it. And I recall one year where my property tax went down about $1, and the next year went up 10.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if you're elected and you go next January, when are you going to introduce a tax bill, and what sort of, you know, graduation scale are you thinking of doing?
I think the first thing you can do right off the bat, and I think it'll pass if somebody stands up and makes it a real issue. And this isn't the end all be all, but it's something that I'm confident that can be pushed through the legislature, and that's to cap appraisals. Stop them, and either freeze or only let them increase at the rate of inflation, you know, or a certain percentage, or the rate of inflation, whichever is less, which is some of the things that I propose as a good first start. And if the local tax entities, and that goes across the board, not just school, but county and city and all of it.
There's dozens of them.
And if they need more money, they're not sitting there letting an unelected board that's not accountable to the voters increase their appraisal rates to generate more money. They would actually have to go to the voters, prove their case, and have a tax increase, a rate increase. And that's not the easiest thing to do. And when you start getting people aware of what's happening with their taxes, you know, you'll start controlling the spending in government. But, you know, for how many of you protest your property taxes? How many of you?
I got a hired gun.
Okay.
In fact,
But it costs you money?
Well, they take a piece of your savings.
Yeah.
But that's one of the several areas where a whole new industry
Right.
has been created to fight your government.
Yeah, how much, to fight your, you know what the definition of that is? It's tyranny. It's tyranny. When you have to do those things, it's tyranny.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't have that wasted time and effort and expense. And if you don't, well, guess what happens? If you don't do that, the next year when they increase it again, you got a compounding interest effect if you don't protest your taxes. But it's a tremendous amount of lost productivity and time on individuals and business to have to deal with that.
So next January, you're gonna introduce a bill that
Oh.
will start on that?
Oh, absolutely. I'll introduce more than that. But that's one, you know, and nothing says, well, here's the deal. You gotta work with somebody in the house on these tax bills. Now, the appraisal thing, I think you can get around because it's not truly a tax bill. I think you can actually introduce that in the House if you structure it, I mean in the Senate if you structure it right. But you've got to work with people in the House, and I guarantee you there's some people in the House that you can get on board.
Well, we've got some guys we're sending, right?
Yeah, and but that's a good first step. But we need to do more than that, and we need to work towards reducing and phasing out. It's going to be very difficult to just end property taxes. I mean, I found that I've worked on the issue before. Like I said, I think it's doable. I think it can be done. But it's the hardest sell. And I'm not afraid to try and make that sell, by no means. You know, you want to tackle it from a lot of sides if you can, and get everything you can and keep it pushing our direction, which hasn't happened. I mean, nothing has happened really on it.
Nothing's happening.
But you can find something that's amenable to the other legislators that I think we can phase out over a relatively short time our property tax burdens, and I'd like to eventually eliminate. I don't want to raise any other taxes unless we've got it set in stone that it's going to do away, not just reduce, but on a path to doing away, set in the Constitution to doing away with property taxes. I don't want to add any new taxes unless it eliminates property taxes, because you know you add a tax, you'll never get rid of it hardly. We just create more problems.
Okay. Education, big
Yes, ma'am.
portion of our tax money goes for education.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you know about Common Core? And what do you know about C-Scope?
I don't know a lot of, I can't sit here and tell you a lot of detail on either one of them, other than they kind of go against a lot of our basic principles, you know. I personally don't think it'll go very far in the state of Texas.
It already has.
How far has it gone?
C-Scope's been in our schools.
Well, it's
800 and something districts out of 1150.
it's now got that many in it.
820.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
So
supposedly it
the last
was,
6 years.
you know, one of our members and her mother are the ones that kind of threw it out
Right.
there and made it public. And
But I mean, that's,
Dan Patrick said it was dead.
mhm.
It wasn't.
It's not.
It's free now. It's, they still haven't shut it down, but it's very dangerous, I see. And I see that a lot of tax
So
money.
it's still, I mean, it still has this undercurrent to it.
Well, no matter what, if it's dead, we have 6 or 7 years of kids that were taught
Mhm.
C-Scope. You
Indoctrination.
gotta figure out how to get that out of it. I mean, education has not been improving no matter how much money we throw at it.
Oh, I agree with that completely.
So you probably need to do some study on C-Scope and Common Core.
Okay.
Common Core's here too.
You had mentioned that one of the reasons that you postponed entering the race at an early stage was to get your business in order.
Yes, sir.
I assume that that's been done and you won't have any problems in that area.
No, sir.
Okay.
I've got my calendar pretty much wide open through the course of this race.
Give us your rundown on how you feel that in Austin, Strauss's effect
his effectiveness, or what
Yeah,
effect,
good, bad?
well,
Is he effective? Is he not effective?
well, I think he's been somewhat effective. I mean, if you're Speaker of the House, you dictate pretty much what transpires. And, so yeah, I mean, that's just a fact. And he obviously is not the most conservative choice that could have been done by any means, and was elected, even though we had a Republican majority in the House, was elected for all practical purposes by the Democrats.
Along that same line now, the Senate, how do you see the Lieutenant Governor's position, the way it has been, and the possibility of what it can be? As far as who do you think would be the best one? Why?
Oh, as far as between Patrick and Dewhurst, I'll take Patrick any day over Dewhurst. I've had plenty of Dewhurst in this race. I don't, in that office, flat out. So yeah, I mean, no, Patrick is, Patrick's got a good conservative record and a good conservative voice out there. He's going to be a significant improvement if he pulls that off, which I think that he will. I believe that he will.
On your top 3 priorities during your upcoming term, you mentioned taxation reform, illegal immigration, which you just touched on, and term limits. Tell us why basically we shouldn't go with the power of the vote rather than a term limit.
Well, we live in a republic, right? And the concept is, within that republic, that all of our representatives have, they're representatives of the people, and they all have the same vote and the same power. And so that the people are evenly represented. But the reality is that's not the case by any means. And I'll give you a good example. The individual that I unseated in '94, Carl Parker, he was by far the most powerful legislator in the state. And all the different things that took place in the '95 and in '97 in those legislative sessions. The education reform and the tort reform and welfare reform and we did some criminal justice, a bunch of different things. Those never would have happened if Carl Parker would have been in place. I just don't believe it. First of all, the Democrats would have had more and more vote, and he was kind of their leader. He was considered the great orator of the legislature. But people outside of that district had no control on whether or not he was in office by any means. Somebody with a freshman senator in there didn't have the same representation as the people coming from Parker's district. And when we end up with people that are in office for 32 years like Parker was, there's a huge imbalance of power between those. And there's no reason for somebody to be in office for 32 years. They become entrenched. They're almost always beholden to special interest. They garner a tremendous amount of special interest money, and it's hard to get them out. I mean, nobody would even run against Parker until I stepped up to the plate because they didn't think he could be defeated. Which, of course, I proved that wrong. But it's hard to get people to do that. And if we have term limits in this state, you'll balance the power, give a more even representation to the people in which the republic was intended to be. Our founding fathers usually implemented their self-imposed term limits. It was never defined, but they did. And they went back, they did what they thought they needed to do, and they'd go back and live among the people and live among the laws they created. And that doesn't happen this day and age.
In your questionnaire, you said that you would support concepts of allowing education dollars to follow the child based on the parents' decisions. Does that include parochial schools? Does it include homeschools? Does it include other?
It includes any education system. You know, I don't have a problem with parochial schools
Okay.
by any means, or to offset the cost of homeschooling. You know, if the child is being properly, you know, educated, actually receiving an adequate education in reading, writing,
Right.
arithmetic, science, or whatever.
And how do you ensure that that is happening?
How do you ensure it's happening now? I mean, really, how do you ensure that it's happening now? Who, in general, has their child's education best at heart other than the parent? Now, there's exceptions to that. And you have failing schools all over in different places. And many times that can be traced back to lack of parental involvement. So, you know, how do you solve that problem? That's a real good question. But I think in some of those areas, you know, I think a voucher type system will work. It'll at the very least, it'll give kids that do want to learn a better opportunity.
We've gone 30 minutes in our question and answers.
So I want to go back to the tax thing. I didn't want to take up too much time on the last one, but I want to come back to my question. So you said that you want a state sales tax, okay, for schools and some of the stuff to replace the property tax without state control. I don't get that.
No. The funding. I'm talking about, we currently pay school districts per student right now. That's what we do.
The state does.
Right. And we supplement the property taxes. You know, the state is paying a supplement above and beyond the property taxes that are collected. The state is the requirement to provide an adequate education. And, you know, if we shift that off, do away with the property tax, have the state fund it, but I still believe in a more local control or a parental control to it. And if we're going to, if we can push towards a more like a voucher program or charter schools or
If the
things
state
like that.
collects the money, the state is going to control everything. There's no way around it. So if you
Well-
tell me that, I'm just going to ignore what you say. I'm just going to say you're crazy.
Okay.
And so, you know, whoever has the money will control everything under it,
Mhm.
just period. And that's free market 101. So I didn't understand that. And then,
But the state controls it now. The state controls that now.
the state controls their portion of it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they control a tremendous portion
I
of it.
understand that.
Because without the state funding, you don't have the school district system anyway.
Well, and the other issue is, you know, there's a lot of stuff goes to school that is not constitutional. The Constitution says, you know, reading, writing,
Mm-hmm.
math, citizenship, and one more. So, you know, football is not
Right.
a state requirement.
Right.
It's
I
standard.
agree.
So, okay.
Amen. You know, right now we have basically legislative mandated socialist programs in many of the departments that we have. You know, I was looking at my phone bill and, you know, that's one of the things. The legislature says that the phone company sets up a program, and if that forfeit program doesn't pay its way, then all the other taxpayers can be taxed. And another example of it is the toll road authorities. You know, we have toll roads that say we're paying for these toll roads, but in fact, TxDOT picks up a big piece of it, which all the other taxpayers support for roads that they don't even drive on. So as a senator, how are you gonna initiate a search of all those agencies and end that sort of thing, if you agree that they should be ended, and then legislation, and particularly on toll road stuff? How are you gonna stop the toll road authority from getting taxpayer dollars from people who are not gonna be able to use those toll roads?
Well, I mean, you know, you can do it legislatively. You could require that.
Well, how do they get the authority to do that right now? How's TxDOT allowed to get involved in the toll roads?
Well, because TxDOT's in charge of the roads. You know, a lot of your toll roads, your original toll roads were done on a local basis. You know, Beltway 8 and stuff is a Hardy Toll Road, things like that. But they should be, here's the thing, if the toll road will not pay for itself, you shouldn't build it. Because it's obviously not needed that much. If it will not pay for itself, it should be funded from the tolls and not subsidized by taxpayers across the state. I believe that. If we're going to use it, actually do a toll road, I don't have a problem with.
So that ought to be a legislative mandate, that if your toll road's not paying for itself, you need to jack the toll up, instead of taking taxpayer dollars to bail them out, which is what they do now. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is TxDOT is a rogue agency that's taking money and spending it for things that the legislature didn't authorize them to do.
And I do not know exactly, you know, that if there's statute
Well, that Ag
exactly on
Parkway
that.
is
Mhm.
one of them that Craig Doyle spilled the beans on.
Right.
And we interviewed him.
Which is supposed to end up being a toll road.
Well, it's a toll road, but TxDOT is paying for almost half of it.
Mm-hmm.
49.
Well, see, and I think that's a little different deal because that was originally slated to be built long before they came up with the idea of the toll road on that. The toll road portion of it was added to subsidize what the state was putting in, not the other way around.
But the
That
folks
was a major road project that the state had in place and has been in place for a very long time.
But they're not gonna let people ride it and say, I want that state lane, and I don't wanna pay toll.
Right? No, they're not. They're not. But
So
that
that needs attention.
Yeah, but that situation there is actually a you know, like I said, that was a state project that, in order to have the funds to build it, they added the toll portion to it, is my understanding. Not, you know, it's not like, you know, they built Beltway 8 and
Yeah, well,
Like
what I
that, or the
understand
Hardy
is
Toll
that
Road.
parts of the road paid for by taxpayer dollars are not gonna be available to taxpayers. And, you know, that may not be correct information, but that's kind of what I got out of it. And do you know Turf, which is
Terry Hall.
Terry Hall? The toll road thing, you probably know this, and I'll be real quick, but dozens and dozens and dozens of projects where right-of-way is being taken from people. Some major cases where the authority and maybe even the fee title is being passed to foreign countries to operate toll roads. Not just 3 or 4 or 5, but like dozens and dozens of major projects. And Turf, which is the Terry Hall's organization, has been involved in it. And they got a website, there's a lot of details there.
you know, we shouldn't have foreign-owned toll roads in the state of Texas.
But we do. In your opinion, the rainy day fund,
Mhm.
when should it be used?
The rainy day fund ought to be used when we have a catastrophe, either economically or a natural disaster. That's what I think its purpose should be. You know, when we had the downturn from you know, 9/11 or the crash in 08, those are the types that should be used on. Or when we had the hurricanes come in, that's what we should, you know, use that to fall back on. It shouldn't be used as a slush fund to do other projects that somebody's just wanting to do. You know, it's on Prop 6, and I don't have a problem with the concept of what they're trying to do on Prop 6, but it should have been funded out of general revenue. They should have found the money to put in that, not pull it from the rainy day fund, which was my big objection to it, and I voted against it. Not because of, you know, the water projects, because we do have a need for water projects, especially in areas such as this. But it should not be used in that purpose or to offset cost of something else when we have enough money in the revenue stream to pay for things. We simply need to control state spending. And if we reach a point to where, you know, we've got excess rainy day funds, obviously we need to reduce taxes.
All right.
Got 7 minutes left.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, under your top 3 priorities, the second one being illegal immigration, I want to go back to that. And you said you propose a well-regulated, state-sanctioned, self-funded? That sounds interesting.
I think it's a very interesting idea.
Volunteer border guard. Can you explain those two concepts?
Okay. Do any of y'all know much about the Texas Rangers and the origins of the Texas Rangers? The Texas Rangers were actually originally a group to protect the frontier and to protect the border with Mexico and to ward off bandits and raiders and stuff. And you know how they were structured? They provided their own horse, their own pack, their own gun. It might have been promised to pay that they may or may not have gotten, after the fact. But what I believe that we could do, because we're not getting the federal government to protect our border. And let me tell you, the immigration issue has seemed to have fallen off the radar. People have given up on it. And I talked this at one of those other meetings, that they do it almost as a war of attrition and just wear you down until you give up. But this is a serious problem. We've got somewhere 750,000 children of illegal aliens in our public schools. You want to talk about public school dollars? When you're spending 10 and in bilingual situations up to $15,000 per student, I mean, you're talking, 8 to 10, $12 billion a year to educate the children of illegals. 70% of the kids born up to our publicly funded hospitals are born to illegals. They're automatically eligible for welfare because they're considered U.S. citizens. We have a tremendous caseload in our hospitals, emergency rooms from illegal aliens. We all pick up the tab on that. They're gaming the system at every turn. You have, the countless number of people who've been killed by illegal aliens from drunk driving and crime. And it's something that we have to address. First thing we can do, people want to brush off and say it's a federal issue. It's not a federal issue. It affects us. Everybody in government, everybody in law enforcement takes an oath to defend and protect the Constitution and the laws of the state and the United States. We have a duty to enforce our immigration laws within the interior. You get 70 miles inside the border, you're home free. We have more illegal aliens in the state of Texas, within the borders of the state of Texas, than there are active men and women in our armed forces. Think about that. It's incredible when you really put it in those perspectives. But what we could do, and I believe there are thousands of Texans, and I'm not talking about, trigger-happy knuckleheads. I'm talking about responsible citizens of this state. That if we had a state-sanctioned, well-regulated militia type institute that was its primary focus was to protect the border, and it was self-funded, means that you get out your checkbook and you write your fee to be a member of that. You fund yourself as far as your supplies and your cost of getting there, all the things. But it would be under the structure of the state government. Now there's people who say, well, you can't do that because, that would constitute an army or something, and the U.S. Constitution doesn't allow that for the states to raise armies. But that's true to an extent, but there's one very important exception. And that exception is to repel invasion. Now, if the millions of illegal aliens that are within this state is not an invasion, I don't know what it is. And we have a responsibility not only to this state, but to the United States to protect our borders. And I believe you'd have thousands of people that would join that. I'd join. I bet you there's more than one person in this room that might. And I think it would work, and it'd be effective, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayers a dime. And it'd be in the tradition of the way we used to protect our border. I think it'll work. But you got to have somebody bold enough to propose it and push it and explain it.
Okay, we're out of time.
Okay. All right, if you wanna take up to 5 minutes to wrap it up.
Up to 5 minutes to wrap it up.
Yes, sir.
You know, like I said earlier, I believe that I am the best man for the job. I believe I have more grit and determination than the other men in this. And I have nothing against the other 3 men personally. I think they're all fine men and they're successful in their own right. But I think I have more to offer. Like I said, I'm not afraid of a fight. I fear no man, only God. I'm not afraid of losing. And that's the first step. If you're afraid of losing, you're not going to venture out there to try and be successful. Period. You have to have perseverance. I think my last 22 years have proven that I have that perseverance. I want you to think about my record and things that I accomplished. And I accomplished a lot of things. As a freshman senator, starting at the age of 29, in a Democrat majority in both houses of the legislature and most statewide offices. We're all Democrat at that time. Yet I was able to push things through. You know, Lamar University, I took a lot of heat from that, going up against the status quo down there. But I got it and I pushed it through. Standing up against the federal government on the emissions testing program. And you know what's really interesting about that? Is when we did that and we stopped it, and we told them no, state after state followed our lead. It's just like the immigration issue. We've got to set the example. You can't wait for somebody else to do that. We have to do it. I'm not afraid to do it. I believe I'm well respected among the members of the legislature and members of the Senate. They do know who I am. I'm a known quantity to them. You know. But if you consider the other things that I did, pushing forward the annexation law, making the greatest changes in over 30 years, stopping an onerous tax system that was going to be imposed on the citizens of this state, returning $1 billion to the taxpayers of this state,